Silence your critics, lie to your fans, double down on poor decisions, ignore feedback. What's that? Oh, this is a big bag of feedback. We don't need that. And then virtue signal from your C-suite office. That is the Ubisoft plan for success. That's to get them right back on track. I am floored. I can't believe it. You know, everything that they've done, every action they've taken, everything that they have said has only dug their grave even deeper. At this point, they're just diving in, and honestly, I can't even really blame them. You know, I had hoped that after all of the bad press surrounding Ubisoft, with the failed launch of Star Wars Outlaws, them pushing back Assassin's Creed Shadows, that they would try to figure out ways to be able to trend in the right direction. And then I thought to myself, why would they do that? I mean, come on. Now we have industry analysts that are predicting that Ubisoft is going to go private and then sell off their biggest IPs. And to be honest with you, they're probably not very far off. A lot has happened with Ubisoft since we last talked about them. And at this point, their graceless downfall has turned into nothing but pure cinema. Ubisoft, once a titan of the gaming industry, is now a cautionary tale of what happens when a company loses touch with its audience, its vision, and becomes so top-heavy that their only recourse is to squeeze their customers for all they're worth. This is a story that we have chronicled before, a company plagued by scandals, internal dysfunction, and creative stagnation. In my video, The Complete and Utter Collapse of Ubisoft, we retraced all of their obsessions with their annualized franchises like Assassin's Creed, Rainbow Six, and Far Cry. Once their crown jewels, now their Achilles heel. By recycling mechanics, churning out uninspired titles, becoming increasingly more predatory with their monetization, and refusing to innovate, Ubisoft alienated their once loyal player base that could no longer stomach mediocrity. But their problems weren't just creative, they were systemic. As I pointed out, in Ubisoft lost more than they're worth, the company has been hemorrhaging money, losing key developers and chasing trends instead of setting them. They gambled on live service games and large projects that nobody asked for, sinking resources into games like the long-delayed Skull and Bones, a game that has now become an industry punchline. They lost it all on Star Wars Outlaws, only selling 1 million copies and then further embarrassing themselves with a release on Steam. And they've closed the studio behind Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, arguably the best game that they've had in recent times, just because they overcharged for it. Add to that workplace scandals and allegations of toxic leadership, and it's no surprise that Ubisoft has seen waves of talent departures and plummeting investor confidence. Despite the warning signs of their games failing to reach audiences, Ubisoft seemed unwilling or unable to change. They clung to outdated design philosophies and tone-deaf marketing strategies, prioritizing shareholder appeasement over player satisfaction while accomplishing nothing. Literally nothing. And while other companies in the industry have found ways to pivot or regain their footing, Ubisoft has dug their heels in, spiraling further into irrelevance. Fast forward to today, and the cracks in the foundation have split wide open. The struggles that we've talked about before are no longer cracks in their armor, they are gaping wounds. Just recently, Ubisoft announced the closure of 2 studios, another devastating blow to their workforce and morale. And then there's XDefiant, a game that was supposed to show that Ubisoft could still compete in the realm of military shooters, instead becomes yet another entry in their growing list of failures. Juice Van Duren, business professor and former CEO and co-founder of Superdata Research, a games marketing research company, is predicting that Ubisoft is headed for privatization and dismantling in 2025. Saying, with the share prices plummeting from $28.19 to $12.30 year over year, the company has become an attractive takeover target. Its valuable assets, particularly Rainbow Six Siege and the Assassin's Creed franchise, could be worth more separately than together. Now, something I want to be crystal clear on is that Ubisoft is essentially powerless. In the videos that I had made previously, I was just basically stating that the Titanic had hit the iceberg. They were already taking on water. The ship was sinking. Their only options right now are to save their valuables and try to salvage what's left. That's the position that they're in right now. You know, in a lot of cases, we talk about how difficult it is for some of these really top-heavy companies to be able to turn things around because it takes a while for them to do so. But we don't ever get to study a company that can't turn around. And that's the position that Ubisoft is in. And honestly, that's what makes this so fascinating. You know, when I had made the video talking about how Ubisoft had lost more than they're worth, I meant it. Truly, I meant it. They have had too many games that they've released, that came out to subpar reception or failed completely, and they spent way too much money on it. And on top of that, the company has too many employees to support. Do people even understand that this company has over 20,000 employees working for them? They are massive. When you're making as much money as they are right now, that is not enough to support that many people. I mean, even if Assassin's Creed Shadows found success, let's say 5 million copies, that's a conventional success in gaming. That's not too bad. That would cover their development costs and marketing costs. And then outside of that, not really a whole lot else. They would need a Baldur's Gate 3 or Elden Ring level of success. We're talking 10 plus million copies sold for them to make a profit on this game. And then even still, it's not going to cover up any of the mistakes that they've made with their other games, with all of the money that they've invested into Skull and Bones or Star Wars Outlaws or anything else for that matter. And then keep in mind that their next games to release after this are much, much further down the road. We're talking years that they're going to have to survive on that money. Assassin's Creed Shadows is not going to sell that much. For Ubisoft to be able to patch the hole and get to shore, it's an impossible task. They're not going to be able to do it. But if they did, it would be one of gaming's biggest turnarounds. But to do that, it would require leadership, strong leadership. But in this case, the captain is just heading for the next iceberg. Following the bad press surrounding Ubisoft, the delay of Assassin's Creed Shadows, and the failed launch of Star Wars Outlaws, you would think that the company would try to remain low profile, not make any waves, and not do anything to rock the boat any further. Disregarding all sense of caution, common sense, and reality for that matter, Ubisoft launched Champions Tactics Grimoria Chronicles, a tactical turn-based player versus player RPG that the gameplay markets as tactical play to win. This NFT game would see you buy and sell character pieces, earning cryptocurrency in the game that you could then turn into heroes, and then you could sell that for real money. The common line of garbage that we normally get with these kind of games, or at least what they try to sell to their coped out audiences. But Ubisoft was selling characters for upwards of $63,000, and to the dismay of many playing the game in true Ubisoft fashion, it was broken at launch with claims of cheaters and exploiters. While Ubisoft tiptoed around their NFT game, Ubisoft's head of Assassin's Creed Shadows held back nothing when it came back to tackling the ongoing discussions about forced representation and the influence of diversity, equity, and inclusion in video games. This has been a major point of contention for potential players and fans of Assassin's Creed, as this is the first game to be set in Japan, a fitting setting for the franchise, but the game's main protagonist isn't Japanese. Assassin's Creed boss Mark Alexis Cote responded to player pushback saying, "Assassin's Creed has always been about exploring the full spectrum of human history, and by its very nature, that history is diverse. Staying true to history means embracing the richness of the human perspective without compromises. For example, in Assassin's Creed Shadows, we highlight figures both fictional like Naue, a Japanese woman warrior, and historical like Yasuke, the African-born samurai. While the inclusion of a black samurai in feudal Japan has sparked questions and even controversy, Naue, a fictional character, has also faced scrutiny for her gender. But just as Yasuke's presence in Japanese history is fact, so too are the stories of women who defined societal expectations and took up arms in times of conflict." Holy gaslight, Batman. I don't think I've seen anybody strawman this hard. I don't think I've seen any backlash regarding Naue. A Japanese female ninja is pretty fitting for a setting like this, and I'll be honest with you, if she was the main and only protagonist, I don't think people would be complaining nearly as much. I personally do not understand the inconsistency of the messaging here. First, you want to say it's rooted in history, then you want to say it's fiction, then you want to say you want to make a fictional character historic. I just don't understand why you keep trying to justify it. Why don't you just say we made Yasuke because, well, we thought it would be entertaining and it's what we wanted to make, rather than making it sound like it's some type of noble cause. First, they claim the game is rooted in history, yet pivot to emphasizing fictional elements while defending their creative choices. Then they blur the lines even further by trying to represent a fictional character, Naue, as a part of some broader historical narrative. It's as if they're trying to have it both ways, asserting historical authenticity when it suits them while falling back on fiction when it doesn't. If the decision to include Yasuke was genuinely creative or thematic, then why not just own it? say we wanted Yasuke because we thought it added something unique to the story. That would make it feel far more honest than trying to dress it up as some noble endeavor to try to highlight diversity. The over-justification doesn't reinforce the decision. It just makes it feel disingenuous, as though they're anticipating the backlash rather than simply standing for their creative vision. Kote would go on to further justify their actions, saying, "This echoes the selfless bravery of our Assassin's Creed protagonists. They fought for freedom, knowledge, and the right to chart their own paths, just as we do as creators. Fight to tell stories that matter in a world that grows increasingly divided. As the authors of How Democracies Die so powerfully stated, democracies crumble when good people decide to stay silent. The same is true, I think, of our creative freedom when we allow fear to stifle our voices, when we self-censor in the face of threats, when we hand over our power piece by piece until freedom and creativity both wither away. We cannot let that happen. It's time for us creators to stand firm in our commitment to our values by telling stories that inspire, that challenge, and help people to connect. Our silence cannot become complicit." This man deserves an Emmy. I am dying here. Please help. Kote is suggesting that criticism or backlash is akin to self-censorship, implying that questioning their creative choices is the same as threatening their freedom to create. But criticism is not censorship. Players are pointing out inconsistencies, questioning decisions, and expressing dissatisfaction for a product that they're expected to pay for, and that's not an existential threat to your creative freedom. It's feedback. Treating critique as a form of oppression is not only disingenuous, but it's actively dismissing the audience's role in this process. The invocation of How Democracies Die is especially egregious. It conflates real-world political and social crisis with the act of creating entertainment products. It's appealing to authority using the weight of academic work to justify your inclusion of specific characters or narratives in a damn video game. But the game is not democracy, nor is it a battleground for your lofty ideals. It is a product designed for entertainment and for sale. And that's where the root of player concerns are right now. This is a product designed to be purchased for entertainment, and this is what you want to use it for. And then when we find out that this game is reportedly being worked on by a staff comprised of people who nearly half of them have never even made a game before, with some of them believing that it is the worst game ever, and your only response to players' concerns is your nobility and the belief that you're some freedom fighter, it only helps to prove that this game, regardless of its delay, will have Yasuke being the least of players' concerns. They're burying the lead. When I see a developer that is this wrapped up in their own social politics, I see it as a mining canary, that they are ignoring what they need to be paying attention to, which is making sure that they're making a game that players are actually going to enjoy. They're not paying attention to gameplay. They think they're writing a stage play. And I think that's what has a lot of players, a lot of customers that are genuinely upset and sick of a lot of these studios and many of their executives. This kind of speech that Kote is using only serves to alienate the players even further, because he's taking the conversation to a moral high ground that is so high the elevation is likely to make you sick. Players are not rejecting creativity, diversity, or meaningful storytelling. They are pushing back against pretension. And their critiques of a product being compared to assaults on fundamental freedoms. I think that's the most frustrating part about all of this, is that it's so easy to see that community concerns, player concerns, customer concerns are being purposefully ignored. This is patented intellectual dishonesty. And because of that, the players and the customers feel disrespected. And this is just a piece of advice that I'm going to give, but when players feel that way, they're not going to buy your games. I don't think that I've ever seen a company so thoroughly and completely gaslight themselves as much as Ubisoft has. And they're good at it. And that's just the state of the company today. Now, following the abysmal launch of Star Wars Outlaws, the game reportedly only captured 1 million copies sold. In an act of self-inflicted financial devastation, the company has chose to stay true to its plans to continue to support the game with more updates, reworks, and changes. In an interview with Games Radar, Julian Garrity, the creative director, said, I'm a little disappointed with the Metacritic. Recognition from the critics is very important to us, but I do think that players are really connecting with what we did. We had a very ambitious target. We literally reached for the stars, and I think that we were successful from so many different angles. There's a magical, unique experience within Outlaws, whether it's Star Wars or not. Now, I want to pause there for a moment before I continue, because worrying about the critics is exactly what got Ubisoft into the position it's in today. As I go throughout this interview, they mostly end up talking about how they're still working hard on the game's story expansions as well as improving the base game. However, I can't help but feel as though this is just an exercise in futility more than anything else, and they would be better off refunding players who bought the Season Pass content and just cutting ties with the game. I wish that companies would stop being so ambitious about the future of their game and focus on the present. What is the point of committing yourselves to future plans if you have no idea whether or not players are going to even play your game in the first place? When Elden Ring was announced, I don't think that there was any mention of additional content that would come in the future. While there were hints and assumptions, we never got confirmation until after the game had released and garnered success. There's wisdom in that. I mean, Ubisoft announced back in September that Massive, the studio behind Star Wars Outlaws, would be moving over to start work on Division 3, the series that studio is loved for, which has already gone into pre-production. From my perspective, given the sales of Star Wars Outlaws and its tepid reception when it released on Steam, wouldn't it be a better idea to go all hands on deck with an IP that you know players want and you know that studio has the most experience with? It just doesn't make any sense, not from a customer perspective or from a business perspective. However, lately, Ubisoft isn't known for having the brightest ideas. I mean, they just convinced themselves that Skull and Bones is a worthwhile investment, and they are telling players in the media that they will turn it around in the next season. Which, now that I think about it, that sounds oddly familiar. Ubisoft coming out to reassure players and the industry that, contrary to popular belief, one of their games is actually healthy and has a bright future. Oh, wait, that's right, XDefiant. Just a few months ago, Mark Rubin, the head of XDefiant, wrote a blog post and a summary of their year one roadmap for the game, and in it, he took the time to take on Insider Gaming's claims that the game was living on borrowed time. Rubin had said, "I just want to quickly address the status of the game, i.e., is the game dying? No, the game is absolutely not dying. We know that there are things we need to improve, like netcode and hit registration and adding more content to progression, but the game is doing well. We just wanted to do better, and we do that by addressing the concerns of the community, which has always been the plan. Ubisoft is very much behind us and has allocated more resources to the team in order for us to do that." Only for 2 months later for Mark Rubin to go on Twitter and announce that XDefiant will shut down and services will end on June 3rd, 2025. Rubin goes on to talk about how the game was a passion project, how difficult it is to get a live service game off the ground, and more. What I find really interesting is this section where Mark says, "If there's something I hope we can take away from this experience, it's the importance of open, honest communication between developers and players. The player-first mentality, along with respectful, non-toxic conversations between developers and players, has been one of the standout differences that made XDefiant so special. From my first post about XDefiant, this was the vision I wanted to champion. I hope it leaves a positive mark on how the games industry treats its players and communities." Yet, none of that ever actually happened. There was no honest communication or a player-first mentality when it came to XDefiant or any other Ubisoft game for that matter. While the game had issues, serious core issues with netcode and hit registration, two things that are quite literally the backbone of a first-person shooter experience, that didn't stop Ubisoft from adding more microtransactions or season passes. Instead, the money printer kept printing while the issues kept pushing players out of the game. While Ubisoft plans to refund the players that had purchased the Ultimate Edition of the game and auto-refunded microtransactions that were purchased within the last month, there are still plenty of players that are left hung out to dry. I think that this is the crux of the whole issue with Ubisoft and many other companies. They're so caught up in their own personal identity politics, personal politics, actual politics, social politics, and all the different ways that they can make money off of games that they have lost sight of the fact that they are providing a service and a product to customers. Technical and quality issues, or even just the vision of a well-made game that players will actually enjoy, is eclipsed by how they can commoditize, monetize, and use their games as a soapbox. While I definitely think that there's a problem with egos within the industry, I think that this mentality with a lot of these companies is born from the fact that they're publicly traded. They have fiduciary responsibilities. They need to make money for their investors. But I also think that it's a symptom of a much larger issue. Too much investment and too much inorganic growth. Many of the biggest publishers and studios in the industry are now incentivized by the sheer size of their organization and the number of their employees to make their games more expensive, to fill them with microtransactions, and to create things of lower quality. They need to make as much money as they possibly can for a minimum viable product just to be able to keep their heads above water. They can't take creative risks. They can't create niche experiences. They can't make games that have their own identity because they need everybody to be interested in that game. They can't remove or limit monetization because, well, they need as much money as possible. So they bloat their single player games with useless content to urge casual players to buy solutions in the form of microtransactions for problems that they created. Ubisoft as a company is a case study for this industry and where it is headed. They aren't alone in this issue. They're not alone in this race. And while games media and CEOs will happily blame toxic gamers for the issues of these companies or say that the reason why games are failing is because of steep competition, they deny reality the same as Ubisoft. Your games are boring, they're buggy, repetitive, and too expensive. We don't need you, but you need us. And that becomes more apparent by the day as we see more games fail and more studios close. Remember who you're working for, or you might not be working much longer. You know, something that I've noticed, and I'm sure a few of you guys have seen this as well, is that art styles, themes, colors, characters, stories, even music at times has started to kind of blend together with some of these games. However, the most popular games, the games that have gotten some of the best sales and some of the best player feedback and retention and all that good stuff, player appreciation, customer appreciation, are games that are incredibly distinct. If I look at like Elden Ring or Baldur's Gate or Path of Exile 2 or any of these games, they end up standing out because they just don't look like or play like or sound like anything else that's out there. But if I take a game just as an example, like Dragon Age, and I rip off the EA and the BioWare logo, and then you tell me who made that game, Epic, Activision, I don't know. Like, they all start to look the same after a while. And I think it's because they're all just chasing each other's tails. That's really all it ends up being. They look to see what the other big company is doing, and they say, oh, we're going to do that too. And that's their big, great idea that they, bring forth to their boards. In the pursuit of growing, they lost their identity. And it made them unable to stand out in front of other studios and other games. And as a result, they needed to make even more money, but they then continued to hire people. And as their companies grew larger and they had more money, well, then they needed to monetize their games and price their games higher. So what are you left with? You're left with overpriced, overmonetized, and boring games that fail to stand out amongst the rest of the competition out in the market right now. That's why games are failing. That's why you're not making any money. That's why the games that you're putting out aren't finding an audience, because there's other games that stand out much better, are much more original, and value our time and money in a way that you just don't anymore. And it's also because you can't, because it really does come down to just how big these companies are. They don't have time to think about what the customer needs. They can only think about what they need right now. And fact of the matter is, you just don't have what it takes to be able to compete in a creative industry anymore, because this cold corporate approach just doesn't work here. Simple as that. You're selling products based on people's wants, not their needs. You can't just do anything you want to what you're selling to us. That's just not how this works. Sorry. Ubisoft has taken too many L's. They've had too many games that have failed, and they don't have enough games to give a positive outlook, not only for their investors, but just in general for keeping the company afloat, keeping your employees paid. Because if we actually sit back and look at every single game that they've failed on and how much those games cost them, well, that's all going on the background against any of the games that actually have succeeded, which is basically none for quite a while now, outside of Valhalla, and that was back in 2018, 2020 or 2019, something right around there. It's been a few years since then, and it's not enough money to float all of the poor decisions that they've made. Nor is, what is it called? Rainbow Six. Rainbow Six isn't making enough money to be able to keep the entire company afloat. I brought it up earlier in the video. They have over 20,000 employees. They have offices all around the world. And even though people are in games, even though people in games media are like, they've laid off 300 employees, and it's just like, they have 20,000. Like, how are you paying for that? No wonder your investors are leaving. They're like, there's just no way that this company is going to be able to backpedal out of this. Their only choice, literally, their only choice is to go private and then sell their IPs. So that's, I'm saying their only choice. I'm saying the owners. That's the only thing the owners can do to be able to make money for themselves, because honestly, that's likely the road that they're going to end up wanting to take. I would imagine that Tencent is probably on the opposite side of that, where they don't want the company to shut down. They want to keep it up. They want to keep the employees there because they want to make the games. And they probably think that they could do a better job at getting the company to produce at the level it should be producing at. I mean, take that however you want. I know people have a lot of thoughts on Tencent. I get it. You know, I'm not really a huge fan of corporate takeovers, but to be honest with you, a lot of the companies that Tencent has their fingers in don't really perform all that badly. So I don't know. This is just ridiculous. I can only predict that there will be more videos at one point in time. I'm not sitting here trying to like farm these guys every single day. I don't really want to do that. I just wait until there's enough to talk about. This is more than I thought I was going to end up having to talk about. Man, pure cinema. This is too good. Good eating, my friends. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did enjoy the video, like the video, subscribe to the channel. You guys can follow me on Twitch if you want to see me rant about video games or die in Path of Exile 2. Outside of that, stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace. Family, family, family.